Poštovani gledalci televizije Bosne i Hercegovine, pozdravljam vas iz Vašingtona. Naš večerašnji gost je ambasador Sjedinjenih Američkih Država u Hrvatskoj, prvi i veoma poznat, vama sigurno, gospodin Peter Galbrigth. Želim vam dobro večer.
Dobro večer.
Da li biste željeli govoriti na hrvatskom ako ja budem govorila na bosanskom?
Bolje na engleskom.
Okay, if you prefer English, let's start in English. Ambassador Galbrigth, you are no doubt part of Balkan history, and I'm very delighted to talk to you. The people of Bosnia and Herzegovina know a lot about you. They know much about what you did in the Balkans, but they don't know why and what really happened. For this reason, I wanted to talk to you and give you a chance to set the record straight. For starters, you are now a professor at the National War College here in Washington, D.C. What kinds of things you're doing?
Well, the National War College is an institution that provides education to our top-level military as well as diplomats and other people in the national security area in strategy. And I teach a course in diplomacy. I teach a course in U.S. foreign policy. And last year I taught an elective course in the Balkans.
Ambassador, one can assess a man not by what he seeks, but by how he handles what destiny hands him. You have been very popular, and you've been, let us say, in the doghouse. In order to understand better what happened during your tenure in Zagreb, would you care to tell us a little bit about yourself before your ambassadorship and situation that developed when you came to Croatia?
Well, by way of background, I come from the northeast of the United States, from New England, and was educated there. Went to Harvard University, Oxford, for my graduate work. Taught in my home state of Vermont for a few years, and then came to Washington. Joined the staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where I worked for 14 years. Actually, much of it on South Asia, Persian Gulf, and particularly Iraq and the problem of the Kurdish people. Then in early 1993, President Clinton asked if I would be the U.S. ambassador to Croatia, assignment that I accepted with relish.
It's been widely reported, it became a common knowledge that you were the one who helped get Iranian arms to Bosnia despite the arms embargo. Can you set the record straight on this point?
Well, I carried out a decision that the President Clinton made that we would not object to the flow of arms across Croatia to Bosnia. The U.S. position, or President Clinton's position, was that the arms embargo was immoral. It was wrong. The effect of it was to punish the Bosnians who were trying to defend themselves, while the aggressors, the Yugoslav army and the Bosnian Serbs, had all the weapons they needed. So it was a very unsighted, very unjust. It was impossible to persuade the Security Council to lift the arms embargo. But in 1994, after we had brokered an end to the Muslim-Croat war, the Bosnians approached the Croatians and said, look, now that the Muslim-Croat war is ended, we are allies. We know that you are breaking the arms embargo, and we would like you to permit us to be armed. And the only way the arms can get here is to come through Croatia. The Croatian president, Franjo Tuđman, then signaled that he would ask me the question to get the official U.S. position. I sent a cable back to Washington asking for the U.S. position. I strongly recommended that we not object. My view was that I agreed with that the arms embargo was wrong. I didn't feel that the United States could itself break the embargo.
Croatians didn't do it for free, did they?
No, Croatia took a cut from the arms shipments, and in the neighborhood of 1/3 of what was provided to the Bosnians.
You didn't pressure Croatians to do so. You just gave them a hint.
Well, we didn't express any view about what arrangements Croatia had with Bosnia. It might well have been better had Croatia not taken any part of the arms shipments. But that was not something we were going to talk to the Croatians about, because we were not getting into the business in any way of facilitating the flow of arms. That we didn't want to get into the details. Our position was simply to say, we aren't going to answer your question when you ask about whether Croatia, should enforce the embargo. We're not going to answer it. You draw your own conclusions. And of course, they drew the right conclusion.
Didn't you do it that way, sir? You did your best.
I did my best, and frankly, I'm very proud of the results. The results include ending the Croat-Muslim War, which I participated extensively in trying to persuade the Croatian government to change its position, extensively and successfully. I conducted the negotiations that ended the war in Croatia, leading to the Erdut Agreement for the reintegration of Eastern Slavonia. I participated in the negotiations at Dayton, which ended the Bosnian War, and participated in the steps leading to the implementation of all these agreements. And I think what happened changed the future of Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia, and all very much for the better.
Is it possible that you read wrongly message from Washington about no instructions?
No, I carried out the policy exactly correctly, and this was looked in extensively, and everybody has concluded that I carried out my instructions correctly, and most people also think that those were the correct instructions. Undeniably, the policy worked. It did enable the Bosnians to arm themselves. It did lead to the change in the military situation. And incidentally, it led to a very dramatic reduction in the Iranian influence in Bosnia.
Ambassador, this may be an abrupt question, but I have to ask you, did you feel abandoned by your own president at the end?
Absolutely not. I continued in office for 2 years after the congressional hearings. I served longer than any other American ambassador at the time that I left Croatia. I was strongly supported by my president, so I have no complaints.
You became close to the leading Croatian politicians. How would you characterize Tudjman, Šušak, and any others you care to mention?
I think it's probably not appropriate for me to characterize them at great length. We had many disagreements with Croatian policy. We felt that Croatia had insufficiently respected the human rights of its own people, particularly its Serbian minority, that Croatia needs to do more to become a full democracy. On the other hand, and particularly, we sympathized with Croatia's desire to reunite its territory, sympathized greatly with the hundreds of thousands of Croatian displaced persons who had been brutally driven from their homes. We worked hard with Croatia to bring about the unification of Croatia. And through negotiation, we were able to achieve the return to Croatia of Vukovar and Eastern Slavonia. President Tudjman, while disagreeing with some of his positions, again on human rights, on democracy, and on that matter with his view of the future of Bosnia-Herzegovina, it has to be said that he has been an effective leader in the sense that he has been able to accomplish what he would like to accomplish, much of what he would like to accomplish. He has run his administration in an effective way, in the sense that he has had it during the war years, an effective national security team. Mate Granic, who was a very well-liked foreign minister, now the longest-serving foreign minister in Europe. Gojko Šušak was an effective foreign minister, excuse me, an effective defense minister, who was able to organize the arming of Croatia, as well as the successful military campaigns of 1995. To say that the Croatian government was effective is not to say that one agreed with everything that they were doing. And again, I want to emphasize there is much with which I disagreed strongly at the time. I communicated that to them, and the United States continues to disagree with many of their activities.
Do you think that Tudjman HDC will relinquish power if defeated electorally?
Well, that will be a test of whether Croatia is going to be a genuine democracy. But in any country, a ruling party cannot stay in power forever. And inevitably there's change, and the test of democracy is whether the people who are in power accept the change. My hope and expectation is that the Croatian government, President Tudjman, the Croatian government, would accept the change. I will say Croatia is fortunate in that it has a strong, effective, and respectable opposition. This is quite a different situation from Serbia, which not only has an indicted war criminal as its head of state, but it also has had a very divided, weak opposition, some of whom, in the form of Šešelj, are even worse than Milosevic, and others, including Djindjic and Draskovic, have been fighting each other as much as they've been fighting Milosevic. Fortunately, in Croatia, there is a very viable alternative to Tudjman and the HDC.
Ambassador, you mentioned many names. You didn't mention Mate Boban. Not very many people know about your role in Mate Boban's removal. Tell us a bit about that time.
When I arrived in Croatia in 1993, it was obvious to me that the most important job I had was to try and persuade the Croatians to end the Muslim-Croat war. And this was the subject of daily, sometimes twice daily conversations that I had with Foreign Minister Granic, with Defense Minister Šušak, and with President Tudjman. And it became quickly apparent to me that it was not going to be possible to end the Muslim-Croat war and in the atrocities that were being carried out by the Bosnian Croats against the Muslims as long as Mate Boban was in power, that he was an implacable foe to reconciliation, that he would never compromise. And so, in the summer of 1993, I targeted Boban, making clear to the Croatian government that we held them responsible for what he did, for what Boban did.
By the way, do you think that what happened in the first place would have been possible without Tudjman's awareness?
Well, Tudjman clearly controlled the Bosnian Croats. Šušak had enormous influence over the Bosnian Croats. And the proof of that is that when we pressured Tudjman to get rid of Boban, he in fact went ahead and got rid of Boban. But in every other way, Tudjman has demonstrated that he runs that he has very substantial control over the Bosnian Croats. You need look no further than to see that once he decided that Croatia could not withstand Western pressure and resist turning over the Bosnian Croats who had been indicted, they all surrendered on a single day. They all surrendered voluntarily on a single day. Well, of course, Tudjman, as we would say in the film The Godfather, he made them an offer they couldn't refuse.
Can we press the war criminal and return of refugees issue a little bit farther? Americans think that in Bosnia everything is okay, even though Karadzic and Mladic are still at large, even though refugees are not coming home, and Republika Srpska is almost ethnically pure. what is your assessment? Do you believe that reconciliation, unified country, and multi-ethnic Bosnia is possible without punishing these war criminals, returning of refugees, and having central government stronger than now?
I don't know very many American policymakers who think that everything is okay in Bosnia. In fact, my view is that unless refugees have the right to return home, there will be no durable peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That the single most important issue from the beginning of this war was, in fact, the right of people who were unjustly, ethnically cleansed from their homes to return to their homes and to recover their property. And I think the Bosnian Serbs need to understand that NATO is not going to protect them forever as long as they refuse to permit the return of Muslims and Croats to the areas from which they have been driven out. Right now, the reality is that the Bosnian government is militarily, economically, and politically much more powerful than the Republika Srpska. And if NATO withdrew, the Bosnian Serbs would not have the resources to defend themselves. And I think there is a strong likelihood that if NATO were to withdraw, and if the Bosnian Serbs still maintain an ethnically pure entity, that the people who have been displaced, the refugees, would organize some return, which which, if it was resisted with force, would lead to military clashes between the Bosniaks and the Republika Srpska, military clashes which the Bosniaks would win, and where the Bosniaks would be right, because it is a right under the Dayton Treaty for refugees to return home. So I see this as the fundamental issue. I see refugee returns as key to a durable peace. I see refugee returns as something that has to occur before we can say the war is over. But I don't think that SFOR should remain in Bosnia indefinitely with the sole mission of protecting a ethnically pure Republika Srpska. If that's what the Republika Srpska wants, then it's going to have to take its chances on its own. And it certainly can't count on any support from Serbia, because that NATO cannot tolerate.
How do you analyze someone like Milosevic?
Well, Milosevic also, his existence is less pleasant. He is branded internationally as a war criminal, and this is a man who is very proud of his role as a statesman. He can't travel outside of Serbia, can't even go to Montenegro. And he too has to worry that at some point there'll be a change of regime in Serbia, where the new regime will decide the most convenient thing to do with him is to send him to The Hague. Incidentally, I think his days in power are numbered. I don't see how any leader can do what he has done, that is, launch 4 wars in a single decade, lose all 4, and then continue to stay in power for a long period of time. There's no precedent for that in history.
Do you believe that Serbian people are, in a way, sick and tired of him, but still not ready to get rid of him?
They're sick and tired of him. I think they're ready to get rid of him. The problem is to find a way to get rid of him. There are no elections that are scheduled. Even if elections are scheduled, they won't be for the position of president of Yugoslavia. But I think this current crisis with Montenegro may, in fact, prove to be a precipitating event for the removal of Milosevic, because Montenegro wants a renegotiation of the terms of the federation. It wants essentially two independent states in some kind of loose association. If you look at Djukanovic's proposal, in addition to the fact that Montenegro would have its own currency, its own foreign ministry, its own army, there would be no president of Yugoslavia. And if you eliminate that position, then I think that is the kind of precipitating event that can help eliminate Milosevic from power.
I just wanted to say wickedly that Bosnian Serbs, they got everything. They don't have own currency, but they have presidency, they have own military, and they behave like state, not like entity, which is another question. There is a question, I think, that many people would like to ask you, and this is a great opportunity. It concerns the U.S. role during the offensive in Bosanska Krajina. Firstly, did you stop the liberation of Banja Luka, and why?
This was one of the most difficult decisions that was made.
You knew at that time it was turning point.
We absolutely knew it was the turning point. Although the decision to tell the Croatians to stop their offensive was made by the National Security Council, really it was up to Holbrooke to decide whether to go ahead or not. And Holbrooke and I went up to see Tudjman. Before we did, we had a long conversation as to whether he should tell the Croatians not to take Banja Luka. And I have to tell you honestly, both of us were very undecided. I was very concerned that if the Croatians took Banja Luka, that there would be a humanitarian catastrophe in which the several 100,000 Serb civilians who lived in Banja Luka fled, along with the surrounding population, along with 100,000 refugees from Croatia and those who had already fled from western Bosnia in the first part of the Croatian offensive, and that you would have 400 to 500,000 people on the roads in panic trying to squeeze through through Brčko and the Posavina corridor. And that could have been a humanitarian catastrophe. That was one concern. And certainly it was a concern that Holbrooke shared. Holbrooke also believed that, that any final settlement would be based on the contact group plan 5149, and therefore the Croatians would be taking territory that would have to be returned. But there was one other issue that weighed heavily in my own mind, and that is whether President Tudjman, once he took Banja Luka, would return that to the Federation. He often talked about how Banja Luka really looked to Zagreb. And I think Banja Luka fit in, including Banja Luka in Croatia's space, fit in his vision of Greater Croatia.
Remember that menu?
And of course, the famous map that he drew for the Liberal leader in London, Paddy Ashdown, showed Banja Luka going to Croatia and in exchange for Tuzla. So I knew his thinking, and I'd heard him many times talk about Banja Luka. And I thought, well, it's one thing.
You wouldn't take a chance.
One thing if to try to persuade Tudjman to give up some essentially empty territory in western Bosnia. For example, the territory around Mrkonjić. But it would be something very different if he actually had gotten hold of his dream of holding Banja Luka. So these were the factors that were in our decision making. In addition, Holbrooke believed that Banja Luka could represent an alternative to Pale, that there would be a different kind of leadership there. And he was right. A different kind of leadership did emerge in Banja Luka.
He didn't talk much about Bosniaks. Bosniaks at the same time say that if America didn't stop them, they would have smashed the Serbs regarding that offensive in Krajina. And secondly, you were involved in Dayton negotiations and you were close to the Bosnian leadership. My question is, since some of the Croats and Serbs have been accusing Bosniaks of Islamic fundamentalism, What is your overall impression on Bosniak's leadership?
I've never thought of the Bosnian people or the Bosniak leadership as Islamic fundamentalists. I've spent much of my career working with the Islamic world. I know what an Islamic fundamentalist is. I've seen them, I've met them, and the Bosniaks are as opposite of Islamic fundamentalist as you can find. I mean, these are, in terms of religious observance, among the most relaxed Muslims in the world. And certainly they are shaped by a very tolerant culture. It was a tolerant culture when the Ottomans were there. Of course, it has been tolerant since, because the Bosnian Muslims have lived in a predominantly Christian environment. And even until recently, they were not even a majority in Bosnia. So, and they understood that. It's a society which, I don't need to tell your viewers, has a very high rate of intermarriage in the urban areas. I frequently heard from Bosnian friends, and I have to say this was true of Muslims, Croats, and Serbs. They would say, we never knew who was a Croat and who was a Serb, who was a Muslim. We didn't think about these things. So I don't think that this is very fertile ground for anti-Western Islamic fundamentalism.
In conclusion, Ambassador, let me ask you about American foreign policy. You are teaching American foreign policy here. In general, you can tell us how would you picture American dealing with international affairs in the next century, and especially towards the Balkans?
I think American policy in the next century, which in any event is only a few months away, will continue to be very much as it has been in this last decade. We will continue to be involved. We will continue to push for the full implementation of the Dayton Peace Agreement, in particular for the respect for its human rights provisions, including the right of refugees to return home. And ultimately, we'll try to get the Balkans off of the international table by encouraging the spread of European institutions. I would hope over the next century, and I hope it won't take the whole century, but maybe the first couple of decades, that the entire Balkan region will become part of a united Europe, part of the European Union. So, in a curious way, what was fragmented in the period 89 to 91 will in some way be put back together, not as Yugoslavia, but as part of a larger democratic Europe.
Ambassador, hvala lijepo. I thank you very much.
Hvala vama.